So we come to the presidential version of Reconstruction with Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson, again, was Lincoln's second vice president. He was a senator from Tennessee. He was a loyalist, stayed loyal to the Union during the Civil War. And his vision for Reconstruction was inspired by Lincoln, but his very, very poor relationship with radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens undermined his efforts considerably and allowed the Congress to seize control of Reconstruction efforts. So, a little bit about Johnson. Had a 4-year presidency. Lincoln was assassinated pretty quick into his second term. Born in North Carolina, not educated at all. Member of the Democratic Party, and was 56 years old upon taking office. Didn't have a vice president. He was the vice president. A little taller than average for the time. Nicknames, King Andy. His soundbite: of all the dangers which our nation has yet encountered, none are equal to those which must result from success of the current effort to Africanize the southern half of the country. His fun fact: Johnson once compared himself to Jesus Christ, claiming that Lincoln was struck down by God so that he could be president. Can't say the man didn't have an ego. And this was where he was born, where he was brought up. Very humble background. A one-room house, served many years in Congress. The only Southerner not to leave Congress after secession. Is he the better class of them will go to work and sustain themselves, and that class ought to be allowed to vote on the ground that a loyal is more worthy than a disloyal white man. So Johnson supported states' rights and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. This interesting picture. There is General Grant. Right here, next to him, President Johnson. Any other notables? Not that I can see. But yeah, Johnson and Grant in the same picture there, definitely. He never earned the trust of the North or regained the confidence of the South. The South saw him as a bit of a traitor. The North wasn't quite sure what to make of him. He says a Union Army veteran, the rebels have gotten back all their rights and have been pardoned. Johnson is a traitor to the loyal people of the Union. So Lincoln had never officially recognized Southern secession, meaning that he never recognized the Confederacy as its own country. He only saw the states in the South, as states with all the laws and rights intact, but there were peoples, I'm trying to think of just the best way to explain it, the peoples living in those states were in open rebellion against the Union. So restoration was a simple matter, according to Lincoln. He says, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, let us strive to furnish the work we are in, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace. And that was his view towards Reconstruction. So Lincoln supported the 10% plan. So southern states would reintegrate when 10% of the state population pledged an oath to the Union and recognized the emancipation of the slaves. And I just bring up again my point from earlier. How do you trust the word of people who rebelled against the Constitution, the laws of the country, the very country itself, a mere 4 or 5 years ago, to not betray the Constitution again? was a very dividing time, even after the war. And there's Stevens. Radical Republicans, go back there, feared a lenient plan for Reconstruction would allow Southerners to enslave blacks again. So Congress passes the Wade Davis bill, which asks for 50% of Southerners to pledge loyalty rather than the 10% that ended up happening. Lincoln himself vetoed this bill. So when Johnson took over, he really tried. It's when vice presidents assume the office after something's happened to the president, they're not supposed to make broad sweeping policy changes. And Johnson, to be fair, didn't really. Congress still didn't trust him, though. I mean, again, from the South. It was just such a dividing time. So Johnson, in December of 1865, declares the South has satisfied all conditions for reunion, and the Union is back together. The country is whole again, in about name only, in no other way, really. He repeatedly vetoed Republican-supported bills, which would extend the Freedmen's Bureau, a civil rights bill ending the black codes. A lot of this legislation, which to my mind shows his true colors. Johnson began a series of round-the-circle speeches, and this was an interesting re-election strategy, hoping to reduce the number of Republican victors in upcoming elections. So what he would do, if I'm remembering this correctly, he would take the show on the road, so to speak. He'd trot out poor General Grant, who was still serving as General of the Armies. That was a post, and other notables, and go talk about how great he was and what wonderful things Democrats did and all that. Didn't work, obviously. One-term president. He was heckled often by the audiences to which he was speaking, and he chose to sling mud, not literally, but verbally. That backfired, which should surprise nobody listening to the sound of my voice right now. Insulting people is never a winning strategy. And Republicans actually gained strength in that next election. They had a veto-proof 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. So it doesn't matter if you have a veto-proof majority. It doesn't matter what the president does. The party in power in Congress can get a piece of legislation repassed and made law as if it had the president's signature. So that's a check and a balance on the executive. Congress can send a law to the president can veto it, send it back. Now, since we've established that Republicans had a veto-proof majority, the Republicans just simply repass the bill. It bypasses the president this time and becomes law as though the president had signed it. So Congress's vision of this was really very different. So Congress is the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members, says Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution. And this was the authority that Republicans used to run the Reconstruction. So the big picture here, the radical Republicans in Congress, and this was a faction. There was a conservative Republican faction as well. These were all members of the Republican Party. That's a common misconception that students have. These are not all different parties. They're just different factions of the same party. So the radical Republicans in Congress, they sought to fundamentally restructure the South through a military occupation, but Reconstruction by the sword only led to decades of Southern resentment towards the North, and that's really what happened. So with the war over, Republicans sought to keep their power, especially against the Southern Democrats, and they were successful for a time. The South was a politically more powerful entity now that African Americans were a whole person and not 3/5 of a human being. The Republican Party feared that Democrats might take over the federal government and bring the black codes to the national level and negate rights that had been fought for and paid for in blood, quite literally, made during the Civil War. So they won big victories, though, in 1866. The radical Republicans took over Reconstruction from President Johnson because, again, that veto-proof majority, and they hoped to completely remake the South. And they did this in a number of ways. The Republicans forced the southern states, it was the southern states that needed the forcing, to ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And this was the Civil War's most dramatic social and economic change. Republicans created the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all African Americans. That was a big one. States denying black citizenship resulted in fewer electoral college representatives for that state. And the 14th Amendment also disenfranchised, which means to take away the right to vote. Former Confederate leaders like General Lee, and didn't allow for assumption of Southern debts. So the states of the former Confederacy had to figure out a way to pay back what they owed. The federal government wasn't going to do it. You might think, why would they do it? And that is actually a very good question, to which I will admit I don't have a clear answer. So Republicans wanted to halt Reconstruction unless Southern states ratified the 14th Amendment, again giving citizenship to African Americans. So the Reconstruction Act of 1867 divides the South into 5 different military zones. Virginia making up Zone 1, the Carolinas Zone 2, Florida, Alabama and Georgia Zone 3, Arkansas and Mississippi Zone 4, and Texas and Louisiana Zone 5. And you see here it's divided between General Schofield, Sickles, Pope, Orden Sheridan, and very famous names you should probably be familiar with. And the Reconstruction Act also created guidelines for readmitting the southern states. And in 1869, we have a big success with the passage of the 15th Amendment, giving the franchise to African American men. We're almost there. Women still had to wait, unfortunately, but we're almost there. And here we have a cartoon showing African Americans voting for the first time, and there were all sorts of mechanisms put into place to stop them from voting, which we'll get to. This is a denouncement of the 15th Amendment. Various races, women, all of it, making it seem like, denouncing, making it seem like a bad idea to let everybody who lives in the country vote. So by 1870, every southern state has complied with the standards of Reconstruction, and we're supposedly back together. So what role did women play in all of this? Women distinguished themselves during the Civil War in limited roles, and were disappointed that the political victories for blacks were not also extended across gender lines. So during the Civil War, women gained new advances. They got jobs in factories. They fought in the war disguised as men. They did all sorts of things to keep both the Union and the Confederacy up and running. So at the war's end, says Clara Barton, very famous name, woman was at least 50 years in advance of the normal position which continued peace would have assigned her. So emergency situations, you have a tendency to propel change forward. Society would not have progressed nearly as fast, and the rights that we enjoy today, everybody probably would have, at least if they didn't exist, they certainly wouldn't have been as full if we hadn't have had this conflict. So Clara Burton and Dorothea Dix transformed nursing into a respected profession. Very, very famous names. Sally Tompkins ran a Richmond infirmary for wounded soldiers, and Jefferson Davis gives her the rank of captain, and this is a fascinating one. In the Army of the Confederate States, you are requested to signify your acceptance or non-acceptance of said appointment, and should you accept, you will sign before a magistrate the oath of office herewith, and forward the same with your letter of acceptance to this department. Secretary of War, Captain Sally Tompkins, Richmond, Virginia. I accept the above commission as captain in the Confederate States of America when it was issued, but I would not allow my name to be placed upon the payroll of the camp. So, yeah, I'll be a captain, but don't pay me. So the women's rights movement was both emboldened and divided over these the passage of the 14th and the 15th Amendments, because they fail to address the issues of women of any race. So this is Frederick Douglass, and you can always tell Frederick Douglass in a photo because of his hair. Very distinguished looking hair. Women had been leading components of abolitionist movements and got absolutely no reward from it. Says Douglass, when women, because they are women, are hunted down, dragged from their homes, and hung upon lampposts, then they will have an urgency to obtain the ballot equal to our own. This is the hour. So women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, again, two more names you should know, very famous Americans, campaigned against new amendments. And we come to Andrew Johnson's impeachment, one of the only presidents to be put in that position. He escaped impeachment by one vote. So it was Johnson. Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. Johnson, Clinton, Trump, and Trump made it to trial. So Johnson's impeachment represents an egregious misuse of constitutional power by the radical Republicans in Congress, who were simply hoping to remove a president who didn't agree with their Reconstruction plans. And I don't know. Well, that's certainly true. I don't know that impeachment in this country hasn't been used for reasons similar to that in the few times that it has been used. So the radicals were angry with President Johnson. They decided to get rid of him. He violated the Tenure of Office Act they passed in 1867, so the president needed the consent of the Senate before removing appointees that required Senate approval. This act was written and passed specifically to protect Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, who was the last real Lincoln Republican, an ally of the radicals that was still in the federal government. Johnson and he did not get along, and Johnson would have been quite happy to have seen his backside if he could, and he eventually did. Yeah, there he is, Mr. Stanton. So the Senate wanted to keep the Secretary of War in office. This as a Republican spy. I don't know if I would go to that extreme, but sure. That's one way you could put it. So Johnson dismissed Stanton in early 1868, and the Republicans impeached him for his trouble because Johnson violated the Tenure of Office Act. So Johnson impeached. Yeah. There's Ulysses S. Grant. Edwin Stanton loading the cannon, ramming in the ball with the Tenure of Office Act, and firing it at President Johnson there. So the lawyers argued that the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional, and that by dismissing Edwin Stanton, Johnson had acted under the Constitution, as it was his power to dismiss his cabinet officials under the Constitution and not this particular law, the Tenure of Office Act. Johnson wins, not by much, by a vote, a single solitary vote. In May 16th, 1868, he's cleared of all charges. So it was over, and the result was announced. There was a wild outburst, chiefly groans of anger and disappointment, for the friends of the president were in the minority. I ran all the way from the Capitol to the White House. When I burst into the library where the president sat, there were no signs of excitement. "Mr. President," I shouted, too crazy with delight to restrain myself, "you are acquitted." All rose. I made my way to the president and got hold of his hand. The president responded to the congratulations calmly enough for a moment, and then I saw that tears were rolling down his face. I stared at him, and yet I felt I ought to turn my eyes away. It was all over in a moment, and Mr. Johnson was ordering some whiskey from the cellar. When it came, he himself poured it into glasses for us, and we all stood up and drank a silent toast.